Go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Exodus 33. Kevin, would you pass out I made a worksheet out of this question. That's the beauty of somebody asking a question, giving me enough time to study it before it's asked, or before the service. I actually turned it into a lesson, and it's not really a faith chapter, although just about everything in the Bible deals with faith to some extent. Exodus chapter 33. And this is dealing with Moses and the children of Israel. They've left Egypt. Moses has gone up to the mount. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a backdrop of this so you understand it. The question involves chapter 33, verse 11. We'll end up there, but I think you've got to, in order to grasp the full beauty of the question, you have to understand the backdrop. And so if you consider that, in chapter 19, Moses ascends to Mount Sinai to receive from the Lord some amazing things, some great truths. In 40 days, God instructs him about the Jewish laws, not just the Ten Commandments, but many of the Jewish laws about the construction of the tabernacle and those kinds of things. Dealing with sacrifices, many of those kinds of things. So, and then you get all the way to chapter 32, and you find that Moses, having been gone for so long, has caused some of the people to doubt and to forget. I mean, keep in mind, you still have the pillar of fire by night and the pillar of cloud by day. So that is an emblem of God's presence, so there's no way anybody should forget that God is present while this is all taking place. He didn't disappear into thin air. He climbed up on a mountain, and God spoke to him. They were instructed not to touch the mountain. Don't let any animals come near unto the mountain, or they're going to die. I mean, so it's very serious, and there was a great setup for that. God established everything that needed to be said. But people are so wicked. People are so stupid. Yes, that's the right word. What'd you say? Stiff-necked. That's the word the Bible uses in the passage. But they're hard-hearted, prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. And what we find after Moses is, think about Moses as part of this. He's receiving from the Lord. I mean, his brain is just talking to God for 40 days. And he's probably excited and thrilled to come down and tell people the Word of God. I've got a message from the Lord. And he's coming down the mountain. And he doesn't find good things. I think, when we think about the Lord's return, he's coming back. And I want him to find things good about us, not like the children of Israel here. And I think there are going to be many that are going to be shocked at what God sees about them. God sends Moses and Joshua down to the people, and the result of that, found in chapter 32, verses 27 and 28. Then he said unto them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Put every man his sword by his side. Put every man his sword by his side, and go in and out from gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay every man his brother, and every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. And the children of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and there fell of the people that day about 3,000 men. So I'm not laughing about 3,000 people dying. I'm laughing about my sound man who, the best sound man is one you don't realize is there because you never hear anything. We're realizing. But 3,000 people are killed as a result of the people doubting, forgetting, being stiff-necked towards God. Huge consequence. After that takes place, Moses goes back to talk with God, in verses 30 through 35. This is a setup for what we're going to read tonight. But look in verse 30. It says, "And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses said unto the people, Ye have sinned a great sin, and now I will go up unto the Lord. Peradventure I shall make an atonement for your sin." So that's Moses' reckoning. He's telling the people, I'm going to go back up to God. And it's about your sin. And then it says, "And Moses returned unto the Lord and said, O, this people have sinned a great sin and have made them gods of gold. Yet now, if thou wilt forgive their sin." I love that. Moses is interceding on behalf of his people. And then he says, "And if not, blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book which thou hast written." That's a pretty amazing statement that tells you the heart that he had. The Bible tells us that he was, of all the men on the earth, he was the meekest among them. A man of righteousness, a man who wanted to please the Lord. But he also cared for the people. "And the Lord said unto Moses, Whosoever hath sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. Therefore now go, lead the people unto the place of which I have spoken unto thee. Behold, mine angel shall go before thee. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. And the Lord plagued the people because they made the calf which Aaron made." So that is the setup. That's God speaking to Moses again a second time. And then God continues that conversation. That's dealing with what took place in chapter 32. The sin of the children of Israel, having the gods made out of the gold that God provided for them by the children of Egypt when they left. And, of course, Aaron, hey, I threw the gold in, it came out a calf. What am I supposed to do? I'm just a servant here. Out came this calf. No, it doesn't work that way, does it? Now look in chapter 33, verse 1. It says, "And the Lord said unto Moses, Depart and go up hence, thou and the people which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt, unto the land which I swear unto Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, Unto thy seed will I give it. And I will send an angel before thee, and I will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite." Now what I love about God is the reality that even though his people had sinned against him, goal that he has for them has not changed, has not altered. He still has a place that he wants to take them. He still designed for their obedience a reward of a land, and we'll see this in a moment, flowing with milk and honey. So God once again establishes the covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or Israel, that he was going to, as a nation, give them a land, and he would drive out those ites, Canaanite, Amorite, Hittite, Perizzite, Hivite, Jebusite. Look at verse 3. It says, "Unto a land flowing with milk and honey. For I will not go up in the midst of thee, for thou art a stiff-necked people, lest I consume thee in the way." God's holiness is such that if he would go up in the midst of them, they would all be consumed. Why is it that God instructs the children of Israel to have their tents put in a certain order? By each tribe, they are to set themselves in an order, so much on each north, south, east, and west side. And why is it then that he tells them to take the tabernacle and put it outside of the camp? Because God's holy. And to put it in the midst of the camp would mean their destruction. Verse 4. "And when the people heard these evil tidings, they mourned, and no man did put on his ornaments," on him his ornaments. So here we have the people recognizing their sin has cost them greatly. Their sin has caused a division between them and their God, the true God, not the one that they were worshiping while Moses was gone. And they did not put on any of the ornaments. I believe he's talking specifically about the ornaments that they got from the children of Israel. Not all of them gave their ornaments to be melted into idols. Not all of them, I think, wanted to follow those who were doing that, but there were 3,000 apparently that did. Then in verse 5 it says, "For the Lord had said unto Moses, Say unto the children of Israel, Ye are a stiff-necked people. I will come up into the midst of thee in a moment and consume thee. Therefore now put off thy ornaments from thee, that I may know what to do unto thee. So why would he have him take off the ornaments? The ornaments, again, what do you call it when you take their stuff? The spoils of Egypt, that which the Egyptians gave to them. The Bible used the word borrow from them. And they were to take those off. God did not want them to be in any way attaching themselves to the mindset of Egypt. And so God has a place for those ornaments. When God tells Moses how to build the tabernacle, there's a certain amount of silver that he needs, and he's going to cover certain boards with silver, and he's going to cover certain boards with gold, and he's going to have things made out of gold and things made out of silver, and there's knops, there's little, on the tops of the poles, there are a little, I don't know if you'd call it a stanchion, but it is a means by which it would attach all the curtains and things that they are putting up for the tabernacle, and those are made out of silver. So God has a place to use those things that they received from Egypt. It wasn't necessarily for them to take, and this is important to me, the symbolism of the things of Egypt were not to be used as the Egyptians used them. As I was reading this, as I studied for this, I realized one of the things it talks about them doing when they were offering animal sacrifices to the golden calves. One of the things that they were doing was dancing. And I can't tell you how many Christians I've had tell me, see, dancing's okay, it's in the Bible. Well, you better understand which context that's in, when dancing is acceptable and when it wasn't. When David danced, he did not do it with his wife, he did it unto the Lord. When they were dancing, they were doing it for their own entertainment, and God was disgusted by it. So be careful when you try to use something in the Bible as a means to justify what you want to do. That's not even anything to do with the message necessarily, it's just true. And so we have in the context, God is establishing some truth here with Israel and reminding them that they're a stiff-necked people. I think it's a constant reminder to us that you and I should never get lackadaisical or comfortable in our flesh or think that we have the flesh conquered, because we are prone to stiff-necked thinking and attitudes, and we are so easily turned by our flesh, what we want, instead of what God wants. So the Lord reminds them of those things, and that they were to put off the ornaments. Verse 6 says, and the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments by the Mount Horeb. So they stripped themselves of the ornaments. They did not want to be tempted by them and did not want to displease God again by those ornaments. Look at verse 7. It says, and Moses took the tabernacle and pitched it without the camp, afar off from the camp. Now, the tabernacle, he had just come down with instruction how to build a tabernacle. We don't believe what he's referring to is the fulfilled tabernacle, but most likely what was, if you remember, as they came out, Moses' father-in-law recommended that he get some people to also hear some of the complaints and some of the things of the people, and to choose out some men who could do that. I think the number was 70 men who would do that. And this is probably the tent that they would take those kinds of cases, or where Moses would set up his, where they could come and bring those cases to him. And so this would have been a tent of a different variety than what he lived in, but not the completed tabernacle yet. That doesn't come for some time yet. But he tells him to take that tabernacle, that tent, and separate it from the rest of the tents where the children of Israel are staying. Took the tabernacle, pitched it without the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. And it came to pass that every one which sought the Lord went out unto the tabernacle of the congregation, which was without the camp. So the tabernacle was a place where if you wanted to seek after the Lord, then you would go to the tabernacle. You would go to that place. Much as we think of church as the church, even though the church is the people within it, not the building, but it is the structure that we come to meet together, to understand the things of God, and to encourage each other in the work of God. Now look at verse 8. It says, and it came to pass when Moses went out under the tabernacle. Now catch this. The tent has been sent away from the congregation. You have to get this in your mind or you're going to miss the significance here. They put the tent off a distance, and as Moses is now going to start the work of the tabernacle and go and to speak to the Lord, everybody, notice what happens here. When Moses went out unto the tabernacle, that all the people rose up and stood every man at his tent door and looked after Moses until he was gone into the tabernacle. Man, that to me is it pictures military. When a general walks in, everybody stands at attention, you know. Well, they weren't standing at attention like this, but they were standing at their tent door, standing, and they watched as he walked in. You think God has got their attention? You think God has made a point and made them to realize that he's serious about his works among them? He has Moses going into the tabernacle. It's a beautiful thing. Verse 9. And it came to pass as Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. Now there's something you don't see every day. So the cloudy pillar that's during the daytime, that has been at the front of the camp, and any time that God was ready to move, he would let them know, and the cloudy pillar would be the direction that they would go. They were to follow that cloudy pillar. When Moses goes into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar gathers itself and goes to the door of the tabernacle. Man, some pretty impressive things going on there. God is showing who he has his favor upon in the life of Moses. It's beautiful. Verse 10. And all the people saw. So we're not to guess whether they saw it. I mean, can you imagine, hey, Jim Bob, did you see that cloudy pillar move from over there to over there, right in front there, the tabernacle? Nobody would have missed that, right? And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle door, and all the people rose up and worshiped every man in his tent door. So this change of the pillar moving to the tabernacle shows that God is approving of what has taken place, and he's in favor of Moses. He's in favor of what's going on here, and the people's response was worship. They're not hooting and hollering for themselves. They're hooting and hollering for the Lord. They're excited about what God is doing. And God is moving. God is working again, and God is not killing anybody anymore. Amen. That's a good change. Verse 11. Now here it comes. And the Lord spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. Now, I have to confess, when this question was asked of me, I read the question. I was like, what? The question was about Joshua. And if I stopped here, most of us would think that's what the story's about. It's about Moses. And the reality of what Moses is doing for the children. And it is about that. I'm not saying it's not, but I got to confess, when the question was asked me, I read it and I said, I don't think I've ever seen that. The next phrase says, and he turned again into the camp. So Moses has talked to God. This is a Reader's Digest condensed version or form. He talked with God, and he goes back to the camp. He goes back where the people are. But that's not the end of the story. Look what else happens here. But his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, so they clarify, this is the same Joshua that you're aware of, that you've heard about, who becomes the leader of Israel after Moses' death. Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. And the question was asked me, very simply, why did Joshua not leave with Moses? My first thought was, Joshua was there? I know that he was there the first time from a distance. Moses is up talking, and when Moses comes down, he meets with Joshua, and then they go down and they hear the sound of the singing and the dancing and all that, and they're not sure what the sound is about. Well, this is now, Moses has gone into the tabernacle, and Joshua's there. When Moses leaves, Joshua stays. So the question is, why? Now, that led to a whole lot of thinking and wondering, because the Bible doesn't really tell us. But there has to be a reason, or God wouldn't have told us that. So I've done some digging, I've done some research, I've looked at some things, I found what some people thought about it, and I've taken what I thought was good out of those points, out of those thoughts, and tried to state that. But there's even more questions that you can ask than that. Think of this. Why did Moses take Joshua with him to the tent? What was the purpose of that? Did Joshua actually go into the tent? It's implied that he did. Or was he sitting outside, as most servants would likely do? Was Joshua able to hear the conversations between God and Moses? I mean, think of that. Could he hear what was being said? How would you like to be that fly on the wall? Right? Hearing that conversation. And then the question, why did Joshua not accompany Moses back into the camp of the people? Why didn't Moses seem to care that Joshua stayed behind? Did Moses instruct him to stay there? We don't have the answers. But it tells us not only did he stay in the tent, but he would not depart, meaning he didn't want to depart. And so that leads us to some thoughts. It seems like God has his hand upon Joshua in preparation for some things that, if you didn't know the rest of the story, you wouldn't know that Joshua was going to become the next leader, but God did. God knows who is going to be the 12 spies going into the land and doing all that. And his response is going to be, let's go in. God knows the favor that Joshua is going to need. And so we see God's plan unfold when Moses, in a moment of pride and lack of patience, smites the rock the second time, and God says, you're not going into the promised land. And after the death of Moses, God reveals his specific plans to Joshua. We don't know whether God actually spoke to Joshua until after the death of Moses. We don't see that until after the death of Moses. But he was right there in both the first time that Moses is on the mount, receiving the 10 Commandments and the other commandments and instructions. And he's also at the tabernacle here in the tent. But here's some things to take from that. When God is doing something, somebody who enjoys God wants to stay there in that place where God is doing something. Now, that's not to say Moses is wrong for leaving. What good would Moses' instruction be if Moses said, man, I just love this, God. Let's just keep talking. I'll just live here. I'm just going to live on the mount right here. You've sustained me these 40 days. That means you can sustain me forever. I'm just going to stay here. No, the point of his instruction was to lead the children of Israel. But Joshua was in a unique place. It wasn't his time to lead yet. So he could linger and stay in that place of fellowship. So a godly leader wants to linger as long as he can in the presence of God. And when there's opportunity that gives him the opportunity to spend a little more time, he does so. You could call this a place of prayer. One of the things I was reading concerning this suggested this was a time where Joshua became a man of prayer, a man of relationship with God. That he began his relationship with God in this. He's starting to see firsthand what God is doing through Moses, and now he's wanting that, and God is using this. And somebody wrote a book completely about that, and it's like, okay, it's hard to justify some things if the Bible doesn't specifically say. But a godly leader accepts the mantle as a humble, obedient servant also. He's not full of himself. If he remains in the place of prayer, intent on being in intimate fellowship with God, it is for the purpose of being better prepared to answer the call of God and to be what God wants him to be when it's time for him to take the responsibility. So the place of prayer for Joshua was first and foremost the presence of God. Joshua is accepting the mantle as a humble servant. Yet he's more interested in spending time with God in the tent than thinking about his future role as the leader. Now there's a beautiful exchange of statements between God and Moses after this. God has already said, we already read where God said that I'm going to send an angel before you. And Moses, if you read later on in chapter 33, you read the discussion that Moses has, who's going with me? And God says, I will go before thee. And Moses says, if you don't go, I don't want to go. If your presence is not with me, I don't want to go. Oh, that we would get that relationship, get that walk with God. We all know the time when Moses comes down from the mountain and his face shone so much they had to put a veil across his face because the people were intimidated by it. Why didn't the people say, hey, give me some of that? help me to get as close to God so that I can have that shine upon my face. Why are we so intimidated by somebody who's trying to do the right thing and so close to God? Why do we get envious about that? Why do we get bitter about that? As if it's impossible for you to walk with God. Joshua did not have that attitude towards God or Moses, but placed his dependence upon God. A godly leader believes and trusts God wholeheartedly. Joshua trusted the promise of God and was not afraid to voice his confidence to the people of Israel when they expressed their fear. Hey, we can go up against these giants. We are well able, not because of us, but because our God goes before us. He could express a confidence because he got a touch of God when he watched Moses in his own life. God chooses a leader and equips them for the task that God has prepared for them. And I think God was pleased to pour out his Spirit upon Joshua to choose him as the next successor because he had that spirit. He had that attitude of submission to God. But a godly leader also waits patiently for God's timing and is fully prepared when the time comes. He waits for God. He didn't try to usurp authority over Moses. You saw that with Miriam and Aaron. At one time, we don't think God can only speak through you. Oh, yeah? Put out your hand. Leprous. Miriam, leprous. God determines who he uses. But you never see Joshua trying to nudge the old man off a cliff someplace. Moses, I'm getting a little tired of you hanging on here. I think it's my turn. You don't see that in Joshua at all. He sees God working. And so when I see the picture of Moses coming out of the tabernacle and I see Joshua staying behind, it's just a little taste of what's coming. And God allows that. Moses allows that. Moses is not such a proud, dominant leader that he thinks he's the only one that can have a relationship with God. I think inwardly when Moses sees Joshua remain in the tabernacle, I think you see a smile come on Moses' face. Yeah, he wants some of this too. Oh my. If only all of God's children would have that desire. Get closer to the tent. Get closer to the place that God is. Are you lingering in the tent? I get impatient. I have a lot of things I feel like I've got to do. And sometimes I get so busy doing I don't spend enough time lingering in the tent, waiting. A quote that I heard in Bible college, I don't know how you prove this is true, but it was said of Martin Luther, the reformer, not King Jr., Martin Luther, that he would spend a minimum of 2 hours every morning to start his day because he was so busy he knew that if he didn't ask God to help him, there's no way he could ever accomplish all that he needed to accomplish. I am much more prone to say, man, I have all this things to do. I better have a shorter time of prayer because I've got all this to do. Woe is me. Which approach is more pleasing to God? And so linger in the tent. You and I have the opportunity because of the blood of Jesus Christ. We are placed into the presence of God. We are, according to Ephesians, we are dwelling already in his presence as God sees it. Not because of our righteousness, but because of Jesus Christ. And we have the ability to dwell in the tent as Joshua did. Before his time, but not really before his time. If he's going to be the leader he needed to be, then he needed to spend some time in the tent with God. What a beautiful... I thought it was an interesting question because it made me realize I don't know if I've ever seen Joshua in that place. My mind, when I read about Moses coming out of the tabernacle and going to the camp, I'm picturing that in my mind. And it never, I don't remember. I'm sure I've seen it. I'm sure I've read it. But the question was put in such a way that I thought, wow, what was Joshua doing there? And then to try to come to some simplicity of what it could be. Because the Bible doesn't explicitly tell us, but we see what God did with Joshua, and we see the reality of that, and so we can gain some fine points concerning what Joshua was doing there. Hey, let's spend a little more time in the tent. Let's wait a little bit longer on God and let him have a little more time to do a great work in our lives. Rather than us trying to beat ourselves to a pulp, trying to do it all in our own power, let's spend some time in the tent with God. Beautiful question. I'm thankful that somebody asked the question. I'm not going to tell you who asked the question because that might cloud your judgment about it or about the person. What was Joshua, why did Joshua stay behind in the tent? Pretty sure I said that's what the question was. So, spend some time in the tent. Let God work in your life. All right, let's go ahead and I better ask if anybody have any questions. I don't want to leave you. There's other questions that were asked, but that was the one I got stuck on. Anybody have a question, Bible question? Doug? Leviticus what?
14:8.
14:8. Okay.
And he that is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes and shave off all his hair and wash himself in water, etc. There are, in this section of talking about what to do with a leper,
Right.
it seems over and over that is saying, he shall do this and he shall do that. Was it mostly men who became lepers?
No, I think it's just implied, the person that does that.
So a woman would have to shave her head as well then.
unless it gives a separate instruction for a woman.
Okay. It just seemed, I didn't know whether he was a
Well, if it
collective
doesn't,
term
if
or,
it doesn't give a separate instruction for a woman, then it would be implied anybody, because I don't think God would just say to a woman, you don't matter, you don't worry
Okay.
about being cleansed.
well, I just wondered if
I'm
maybe,
skimming down here. It does not have separate instructions for a woman.
no, it doesn't until it speaks of other things, then it says this for a man and that for a woman.
Mhm.
But, okay.
A leprosy is very much a picture of sin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Common practice, yeah. Right. Did not shave their head except for some extreme times. Yeah, so the picture is, I've always thought leprosy is a great picture of sin, and this is talking about those who have been cleansed from it. So, right, right. So to present yourself so you can be inspected. When we're talking about our righteousness, we're given robes of righteousness, so it's very apparent that we are not, it is not hard to determine what our righteousness is in. So, but as far as a woman, I don't see that as being separate, because there would have been, if there was separate instructions for women in leprosy, we would see that.
Right. Okay.
Instruction for each.
And then let's go back a little to chapter 7:34.
For the wave breast and the heave shoulder have I taken of the children of Israel from off the sacrifice of their peace offerings, and have given them unto Aaron the priest, and unto his sons by a statute forever from among the children of Israel. Yes, what's your question?
Is there a significance to waving and heaving?
Those are offerings that were given that they could partake of. They would be able to partake and eat of that offering, separate from a burnt offering, which all of it belonged to God.
Okay.
That's why it says that it was given unto Aaron the priest and his sons by a statute forever from among the children of Israel. So it was an offering that was made for different significances, but the priest would benefit from that. They would take the offering and wave that before the Lord, and the heave shoulder, just different sections of the animal for that. There is a great picture of that too. I don't remember the full significance, but I remember the dean of a college preaching a message on that offering, and it was. I just remember being in awe of what God did with that, but I'd have to do some serious study to be able to pull all that out.
I see. And then is there a significance to the fact that the certain things are done with the right finger or the right side, and something else is done with the left?
Yeah, when they had specific things that they would take the blood. I think it was the goat, the scapegoat. They would take the blood of the goat that they slew, and I think it's the thumb,
The right ear.
and on the right ear, and that all that is a pictorial significance. And,
Pictorial.
yeah.
So, what is what I'm asking? Yeah.
I would have to do a study on that.
Okay.
To know the exact. But it's all a picture of Christ. It's all a picture of the sacrifice. It's all significant. Everything is significant that God does.
Yeah. But as far as what's done on the left and what's done right.
Yeah, I don't know at this moment. No.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, let's go ahead and take some prayer requests tonight. I don't know if they do or not. Do you use the microphone for the prayer request? No. Okay. Huh? Okay. All right. I gave you an update on Chris and Bob and Shauna's dad. And I don't know if I told you Shauna's dad, they're going to try to treat with medication rather than a bypass or through stents. Continue to pray for his health. And also for her mom. She was had her pacemaker checked out at the same time. Any other updates or prayer requests today? Tom? They broke her jaw. 7.5 hours to do that. Okay, but she's doing good now. And what's her recovery look like?
Well, initially she's in the hospital just for 1 night.
Wow. Wow. What? Liquid diet. Mm. Wow. So pray for Rebecca. 2.5 to 3 months. She'll be in recovery as long as Chris will be with his ankle. Okay. Other prayer requests? What? Okay. You guys need sign language courses too. Okay. No other prayer requests? All right. Let's go ahead and break into people, groups. Pray with one another. Pray for one another. Remember our missionaries and their needs, financial as well as spiritual.